In a medical encounter, patients typically present to their doctor a variety of personal troubles, whatever's ailing them, whatever reason they had to go to the doctor to seek help in the first place. And these troubles very often have root in social issues that go beyond the individual level and can often be attributed to issues in the macro level structure of society. So there could be a problem in the patient's social situation, which is structured by that macro level social structure that's now affecting them to the point where it's taking the form of a personal ailment and symptoms. But then when they go to the doctor only identifies it as a personal ailment. They tend not to give critical attention to the social issues that are contributing to the personal issues. Instead of trying to identify the social origins of a personal illness and try to change those social contexts to cut the issue off at its root instead of just managing its symptoms as it emerges. Doctors only help to fix the personal symptoms as they emerge in the person, as opposed to identifying or trying to correct the underlying social causes, the macro level causes of our personal and micro level symptoms. Doctors often prescribe treatments and medications and regimens that help patients cope with and adapt to the troubling social conditions instead of trying to change them. So they're subconsciously reinforcing those social conditions that are causing and forming the root of the problem in the first place. The figures and texts in medical discourse aren't pointing these social causes out. They're not trying to change them, and thus they're serving the ideological function of getting the masses to act in line with their surrounding conditions that the elites benefit from, even though they're clearly causing problems for anyone who isn't amongst that elite social group. Doctors help patients accept their detrimental social conditions as they are. So there's a degree of pacification at work. The doctor pacifies the social agency of the patient. The doctor disregards the patient's potential role as a social actor and their capability to change the social structures around them. So a lot of the ills we experience in ourselves and in our personal lives have roots in the ills of society. And we could potentially use that commonly shared experience of discomfort or unease or illness to identify with one another and identify the flaws in our social structure that structure our everyday lives. But doctors ideologically conceal the macro level origins and the macro level potential for change of what we experience, instead reinterpreting and reframing these ills as personal illness and a personal problem to be dealt with personally, something that is technical and medical and scientific and thus not caused socially or amenable to social change. So social problems are rendered technical and amenable to technical change as opposed to social change. One of the social structures that's reinforced and strengthened and perpetuated through medical discourse and the ideology it serves is work, the structure of work and the big picture macro level structures of economic behavior. And medical discourse attempts to produce a distorted vision of work, one that benefits the few over the many, and tries to get the many to accept these ideas. So values are implicitly communicated within doctor-patient interactions when doctors transmit certain conceptions of work and certain notions of what work means and how work should be treated to their patients. Through those interactions and through the doctor's dominant subject position as the source and the arbiter of knowledge vis-a-vis their patients. And these conceptions that doctors transmit to their patients reflect more general ideas and values regarding the macro level, big picture surrounding economic activity in society. And they reinforce the dominant ideological conception, that specific view of work and economic production, that when everyone shares and takes part in this vision of what work means, then it perpetuates and reproduces the social conditions that currently exist so that the elites in society want everyone to see work in that certain way. And doctors and medical discourse help to perpetuate that notion and disseminate and spread that view to the masses so that they see work and treat work the way the social elites want them to. because it benefits the elites at the expense of the masses. So health, just like anything, is a discursive construct. Its meanings have been socially constructed. The signified meanings that you attach to the signifier of the word health change depending on the culture and time period that you're located in. And just as there have been many definitions of health over time, modern medical discourse specifically has promoted and emphasized the interpretation of health as the ability to work. So the term health is a signifier, and the signified is the concept of working and being productive. It's conflating the two so that to be healthy is to be able to work. All those other considerations and definitions of what's considered healthy, such as happiness or mental or emotional stability or having food and shelter or physical safety and well-being and freedom from discomfort, those are things that would be considered healthy, but they're all kind of disregarded by medical discourse, which constructs that semantic association, that meaningful association between health and your ability and availability to work. Remember a few weeks ago when we were talking about the discursive construction of health by fitness discourse and various magazines and social media pages, and how health in that case was conflated with hotness and beauty? Well, medical discourse takes a bit of a different approach in that it discursively constructs our ideas of health that instead reinforces the economic structure of society through patterns of labor. So on the macro level side of things, there are all sorts of public health messaging and policies that try to inculcate this idea of you need a healthy workforce. To be healthy is to be productive at work. Mass media produces images and ideas that the healthy person is one who contributes and produces economically. And when trials are conducted for the efficacy of new medical treatments, one of the criteria on which the efficiency of that pill or medicine is measured and judged is based on its ability to get the patient to work productively or return to work if their ailment is causing them to miss work. And then on the micro level side, doctors, when they're interacting with patients, communicate very subtly a message with instilled values that work is preferable to idleness. Being in motion is discursively constructed as being healthier than being at rest. But not just being in motion, being in a specific motion that's in service of the existing economic structures. So putting yourself to work, that's what's considered healthy. So when people get sick, they often have to miss work. And that's when doctors step in and intervene and get involved in this process in order to render that patient productive once again, in order to rehabilitate them and return them to being a productive worker and member of society, so that that person once more fits in as a functioning cog in the wheels and the gears of society. So doctors are really the arbiters of health when it comes to work and employment. Like, we've all gotten a doctor's note or a sick note when we couldn't work or go to school. Doctors are the judges of your ability to work, and they're ultimately trying to get you back to work. Like, their entire array of prescriptions and treatment regimens are designed with the intention of getting you feeling at least better enough to be able to return to work. So there's all these discursive associations going on between work and health. In order to work, you need to be healthy, and in order to be healthy, you need to work. And all sorts of implicit values and attitudes about work are being transmitted to encourage patients to continue to perform on the job and be a productive worker. So that's how medical discourse facilitates the capitalist ideology of work and productivity. So that's one macro structure in society that medical discourse reinforces. But another structure in society that medical discourse reinforces is the traditional family unit and its roles for each member, such as the husband or the mother or the child or the teenager or the grandparent. Medical discourse serves a normalizing function to put everyone in their right place within the family unit and to reduce the potential for deviancy. So to reduce the potential for people to stray away from the roles and behaviors and identities and subject positions that are discursively belonging to the normal family unit. And the family unit itself is a unit of ideology. It's probably one of the most important units of ideology because it affects us from the moment of our birth throughout our upbringing and then into adulthood. As we become the head of a household ourselves, and then when we're the head of our own family, we then perpetuate the patterns that were instilled in us to the next generation to take up that mantle. So just as a productive workforce is required to perpetuate existing social structures as they are, there are certain patterns of sexuality, heteronormative sexuality, and traditional notions of the woman's reproductive role and their role, the maternal role they play in child raising and being a caretaker. The macro level social structures would dissolve and crumble and deteriorate if women didn't continue being put in that subordinate position as the mother and the supporter and the caretaker. So the family unit serves the ideological purpose of keeping them in that place. And doctors further facilitate reinforcing those traditional gender roles. Doctors help to subtly transmit certain notions and values regarding family life and what kind of family life we should each pursue and what roles we should play depending on our gender or our age. So like I said, women are often consigned in society to the reproductive role. In order for a woman to be seen as healthy, she needs to have functional reproductive activities. And doctors help women sustain these reproductive capabilities. Oftentimes, if a woman goes to see the doctor will start asking questions related to that, even if it's unrelated to the issue that the patient came there to report. So like just as an aside, when the doctor is musing, they'll say, how have your menstrual cycles been? And just notions that subtly reinforce the idea that a healthy woman is a reproductive woman. And then there are other ways that doctors kind of insert themselves into family matters. Like they'll ask you, how are things going back at home? Again, another indicator of health for doctors is stable family relations and being able to uphold one's familial responsibilities. So just as the doctor tries to get the patient to return to work and be a productive employee, they also try to get people to conform and adhere as closely as possible to traditional family roles and gender roles. In this way, medical discourse intervenes in and invades and imposes itself on our private lives and our at-home behaviors. And medical discourse regulates these micro-level at-home behaviors and attitudes so that they reinforce and support existing larger social structures. Medical discourse serves to keep the traditional family unit intact because that traditional family unit is such a potent source of ideological indoctrination of values that we live by. Outside of just those moments that we're in contact with doctors or medical discourse. That's what I'm saying at the outset of this lecture, in terms of even if you don't find yourself in a doctor's office or a hospital, you are carrying these forms of discourse and power with you throughout your everyday life, way beyond just the doctor's office or the hospital. It's at home, it's at work. Medical discourse plays a role in regulating and giving meaning to and inserting its power relations in these other areas of everyday life. So on that note of the extension of medical discourse into an increasing number of areas of everyday life, even though you think medicine and science is a relatively narrow realm of knowledge, more and more things are increasingly considered problems that are only solvable by medicine and science. So it tends to medicalize a wide range of problems that aren't originally medical, like psychological and social and economic and political problems. Like I've said a couple times now, it renders social problems technical, as if social problems can only be solved from the technical approach of specialists and experts. And historically, over time, numerous areas have increasingly fallen under the scope of medical control. I've already given the examples of your work situation and your at-home family situation and sexuality and gender roles, but it's problems throughout your life, from birth through adolescence and aging and dying. They're all made to be medical problems, or your difficulties experienced in the educational system. So learning problems or maladjustment where you don't feel like you fit in, or student psychological distress, all these things that could very well be a result of psychological, social, economic, and political problems become a medical problem that can only be solved medically. which robs us of so much potential for exercising and activating our agency and taking action to change the psychological, social, economic, and political conditions that contribute so much to our manifestations of illness or abnormality. So medical discourse expands into more and more areas of life so that it has an increasing say in how we conduct ourselves. And more aspects of our everyday experience seem to fall under the umbrella of medical intervention, so that it becomes the only way to think of things and to solve things from the medical perspective. And as the medical management of social problems has increased, the social roots and origins of these personal troubles become mystified and concealed and covered over and depoliticized. Potentially revolutionary events are robbed of their social power, and that's ideology at work. It's to conceal our real conditions of existence and put up an imaginary veil. And medical discourse is that imaginary veil where we now see everything as just a medical problem that we go to the doctor or a specialist or a scientist or an expert to solve, as opposed to trying to exercise our agency as social actors and our ability to initiate collective change at the structural level instead of just trying to manage its impact at the personal level. One particular technique of disciplinary power is the confessional technique, the confession part of the Catholic Church's discourse and structures, and one of its apparatuses of social control, where people go to confessional and admit to a priest, the authority figure in that discourse, to bad or unhealthy behavior. They confess their sins to the priest and they atone for their guilt. And by virtue of confessing, they are already speaking themselves into religious discourse and its values about what is normal and what isn't normal. Because if they didn't see what they were doing as abnormal, then they wouldn't be confessing to it to a priest. So they're basically, again, tacitly acknowledging and acceding to the reigning knowledge in that discourse regarding what's right and what's not right, what's immoral and what's moral, and what they can morally do with their body and what they can't do with their body because it would be a sin. So as soon as you confess, you're tacitly buying in to that religion's values of what is and isn't right and what should be confessed to an authority figure in order to cleanse oneself of sin. So after the Enlightenment, religion lost some of its widespread power to extract such confessions from us and to get us to speak ourselves into its discourse and thus its power relations. And a lot of this confessional power was replaced and redirected from the church to medical discourse. So medical discourse has taken over the role that religious discourse once played in governing our behaviors to ensure that we conduct our own conduct in ways that are desirable for the elites of society. Modern medicine and science post-Enlightenment became the new authority that influences and dictates how we conduct ourselves. It took over the ideological role that religion once served of getting the masses to behave in the best interest of the elites. That's what religious discourse was once used for, as that ideological tool that produced a conformation and homogenization of behaviors and beliefs amongst people for many centuries. So the idea constructed in religious discourse that you need to behave a certain way because some things are considered a sin and other things are considered immoral has been replaced by the idea constructed in and by medical discourse that you need to behave a certain way because this is healthy and this is unhealthy. So moral and immoral have been replaced by healthy and unhealthy. It's essentially the same thing, but just a different coat of paint. So just as a churchgoer would confess what's been tempting them to the priest, we now have a patient confessing what's ailing them to their doctor. And again, by doing so, they're speaking themselves into the medical discourse and legitimizing its notions and values of what's normal and what's not normal. The patient is basically confessing to the doctor what is not normal about them. They're already bowing down to medical discourse by acknowledging that. And there's a sense of guilt here too. Just as with the confessional example, there's a sense of personal responsibility for what's afflicting you. as if you caused your own illness that you're now confessing to the doctor or reporting to the doctor, or you did something wrong to cause what's afflicting you that you're now experiencing. And there's also a sense of subtle implicit judgment that's going on. And it could even be magnified in the medical context compared to the religious context. Because at least in a church confessional, you were behind a screen. It was intended to be anonymous. But in the medical encounter, you are fully exposed to the gaze and the scrutiny and the judgment of the medical practitioner. When a patient's symptoms reflect stress from their life situation, such as at work, for example, a doctor tends to feel that it's impossible to change their life situation or change the social structure surrounding them, such as their work environment. The doctor sees it as beyond their responsibility or even the capability of their medical role. So instead of trying to initiate any sort of social change for the patient, the doctor helps encourage the patient to adapt to and cope with their circumstances within the social structure instead of thinking about trying to change it. The doctor prescribes treatments and regimens that manage the symptoms as they appear on the surface of our personal experience, instead of dealing with the underlying cause and social origins of these problems. So stress, for example, often has a source. We don't just feel stress inherently for no reason. Stress is like an evolutionary mechanism that's meant to make us feel uncomfortable, to act as a signal telling us that whatever situation we're in that's causing stress isn't good for us. So there usually is a life situation, often caused by the structures of our society, maybe the economic pressures of capitalist society that's causing our stress. But a doctor doesn't try to acknowledge the role and contribution that these structures play in your stress. They just manage the stress as it appears on the surface, rather than addressing what's causing it to emerge on the surface of our thoughts and emotions and behaviors. Doctors will give you behavioral regimens or therapy or recovery or prescribe medication to help manage the symptoms of that stress, but they're never addressing its cause. And the fact that the cause has a social origin that can be changed through collective action. So doctors are seeking solutions within the existing discourse, within the existing social structures. So coping mechanisms like relaxation techniques or counseling or therapy or crisis management or anger management or depression management or anxiety management, just managing the emotions that emerge from occupying and navigating society as it's currently structured, and prescribing various medications to numb us into just coping and accommodating our existing circumstances. And all of these prescriptions naturalize the social structure that put us into such perilous and stressful positions to begin with. The implicit value that doctors are transmitting is that you can't change the social structure, so don't even try. So various people face economic insecurity or racial discrimination or sexual discrimination or difficulties in family life or occupational stress. And all of these social problems are just kind of glossed over as being personal ailments, so that we're more likely to change ourselves and to adapt to the social structure that doesn't fit us, instead of trying to change the social structure so that it better fits us. Apparently, something like 40% of all graduate students experience some form of mood disorder, such as anxiety or depression, during their time as a graduate student. So it's not just a coincidence that 40% of graduate students experience that. It's not just each one of them personally happens to have depression or anxiety. It's clearly a structural issue that's caused by their life situation and work situation as a grad student. But no one tries to change the structure of grad school. Various graduate and program administrators and university executives, they know full well that almost half of their graduate students are going through mental health struggles, and they don't lift a finger to try to change their programs or the structure of their programs. They put it on the students to change themselves. Here, take these pills or go to therapy or take a medical leave. So in terms of the structure agent binary, the binary between social structure and social agent, medical discourse offloads all of the responsibility for how we're feeling on us. It's very much a neoliberal ideology. Structure, on the other hand, is seen as the natural and immutable part of the binary, whereas we as agents are seen as the only parts of the equation that we can change, so we're made to change ourselves to fit the structure. And we can see these ideological values in the rhetorical techniques of medical discourse and its texts and proclamations and product advertisements that emphasize notions of self-care, take care of yourself, or daily cleansing, and notions of consolation and management and coping. All these things that put the emphasis and the responsibility on us so that we perceive these issues as personal issues instead of social issues. So we've been roasting doctors kind of hard, but medical practitioners, doctors and nurses and people working within the healthcare industry are largely well-intentioned. They're still trying to help people. They're not always consciously aware of all these ideological power effects that are indirectly exercised through their healthcare work. So just like the week on the body, when we were talking about the gym and how it's important to be critical of the role that any given figure or structure plays in discourse and ideology, we don't need to get to an overly cynical level where we believe that all these people are evil and they're consciously aware and just rubbing their hands together and grinning snidely at the ideological work they're doing every day during their medical practice. Just as I gave the disclaimer to not burn down any gyms, please don't burn down any medical centers either. That's what's so nefarious and insidious about ideology, is that people can be spreading it and be vehicles of ideology without even being aware of it. It's more subconscious than that. Doctors and nurses trying to help, but they can still be complicit in reinforcing those implicit social values that perpetuate and continue the existing social order as it stands. So we shouldn't look at doctors and nurses and other medical professionals as if they're deliberate discursive enforcers of ruling class ideology, but we can still look at them as potential unintentional conveyors of this ideology. Like I said, with all the various physicists belonging to different subfields of physics, they're doing what they've been trained to believe is the best and only way to help with their specific set of techniques and tools that they've learned, with their specific hammer for identifying and giving medical meaning to and prescribing medical treatment for various things that we experience, the nails that hammer is applied to, so to speak. So a doctor doesn't just stroll into their clinic in the morning and say, I'm going to reinforce some ideology today. But by virtue of the whole discourse that precedes them, it existed before they got there. It existed before they were even medical students. Medical discourse existed before our entire current generation of doctors were growing up as children. And medical discourse employs cultural and media texts such as pop culture and news media that glorify and enshrine the position of medical professional, thus opening up that glorified subject position for them to want to occupy. A whole generation of bright young people want to become doctors and use their drives and talents to learn that specific branch of medical knowledge and spend their lives practicing it in efforts to help people in a way that they're often passionate about. So here's an example of a TV show that was out probably late 80s, early 90s, about a child genius, a whiz kid who becomes a doctor at the age of 16. So imagine being a child yourself and watching a show such as this.
Douglas Doogie Howser is a whiz kid who breezed through high school in just 9 weeks. At age 10, he graduated from Princeton and then passed his medical board at 14. But as a 16-year-old doctor, he must find a way to balance the demands of professional medicine with the everyday pressures of being a teenager.
My beeper. I gotta call in Wanda.
Today's his 16th birthday. Getting his license would just be the most perfect present.
You want to go to jail?
No, you'll be going to jail for criminal negligence.
Who is this kid? That's my son, the doctor.
Neil Patrick Harris stars as Doogie Howser in this award-winning comedy-drama television hit, brought to you by Emmy-winning co-creators Stephen Bochco and David E. Kelly. Because when you're a boy genius, life can be a mystery. Doogie Howser, now on DVD from Anchor Bay Entertainment.
So medical discourse preceded the entire generation of current medical practitioners we have today. And medical discourse recruited the figures who occupy it from the population by proliferating texts such as this pop culture text in television media to open up that subject position of the brilliant young doctor that other youth watching this show would aspire to and want to become doctors. But these well-intentioned motives of helping and acting altruistically are then co-opted to have pretty much the opposite effect of stifling and conserving the existing state of affairs. People don't become doctors because they want to change things. They do want to help people, but they don't want to change things. The doctors and healthcare professionals' ideological role isn't an intentional thing. It's a byproduct of the whole discourse, the whole structure of the interaction they have, the structures of medical spaces such as hospitals and doctors' offices, all the knowledge that they've learned and been trained in, and their methodologies and their technologies and their textbooks. The whole discourse even conceals the doctor's ideological role from the doctor themselves. So ideology is at play for both the patient and the doctor. They're both vehicles that channel ideology. And we can note this unintentionality by remarking that the vast majority of doctors come from upper middle class families. So their upbringing, their class position of relative privilege will give them a certain outlook on life. It'll color their view of social life in a way that they don't see much wrong or requiring change in society, and they tacitly transmit these values and these messages to their patients, even though those patients may not belong to that same upper middle class social or economic group. So whether they're consciously aware of their ideological power or not is irrelevant, because doctors do benefit from maintaining the status quo, even if they're not actively or intentionally trying to do so. Doctors, just by virtue of their life experiences, don't seem to see much pressing need for social change due to their own privileged perspective from which they don't see anything wrong with the social structure as it currently stands. And they transmit this idea that nothing's wrong and nothing needs to or can be changed on the macro level, and that the only level from which pain and discomfort and unease can come from and be changed within is the micro level of everyday prescriptions and regimens and personal management for people who would probably benefit from a bit more macro level social change. And that's ideology right there. Again, the views of the many are shaped by the interests of the few. And medical discourse and all the figures and texts within that discourse are conveyors of that ideology. They're the ones who synchronize the views of the many to match the interests of the few, even when it goes against the best interests of the many. So despite their best conscious intentions, the medical practitioner unintentionally helps reproduce the same notions and values and institutions and structures and power relations that form the root of a lot of our personal anguish and our personal ailments and illnesses.